When I married Jillian, or Jill as she preferred to be called, I had no idea of the nightmare that would unfold. My name is Tony Rowan. As I mentioned, my wife's name is Jill. When we got married, I was sure that we would grow old together and enjoy our grandchildren. I started my own business as a consulting engineer 2 years after we got married. Jill was working for a small medical supplies company. We both agreed to get settled and save some money before starting a family. For 8 years we were happy, and our sex life was great. I honestly thought I had married the perfect woman. I bought a small cottage in a quiet side street. It needed a lot of repairs inside, but was structurally sound. Our nearest neighbor was 200 yards away, and there were only 6 other houses in the lane. It took almost a year, and the house was finally finished. We did most of the work ourselves. I had to hire workers to do some plumbing and electrical work. I was glad the job was done. Jill and I often talked about how perfect it would be when we finally had kids. Everything went wrong just before our 9th anniversary. Jill often became very harsh with me. Add that to the fact that our sex life was practically dead, and her attitude began to piss me off. Jill started meeting girls from work several nights a week, or so she said. Wherever they went, it must have been nice, because she never got home before midnight. I began to think the worst, but I reasoned that she would never cheat on me, although I had no idea how wrong I was. I had a childhood friend whom I turned to for advice. Barry Patton and I have been friends since we met in our freshman year of high school. When my company expanded and I needed an executive director, I turned to Barry because he was someone I could trust. Barry knew Jill, and at first, he couldn't believe what I was telling him. But after learning the details, he changed his mind. All the signs are there, Tony. If you want my opinion, I think Jill is cheating on you. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I would bet my career on it. When Barry said that, I knew he wasn't joking. I thanked him and returned to my office. I sat at my desk wondering what to do in this situation. If Jill cheated, then that was it. Our marriage was over. The bad thing was that she would get half of everything I owned. I looked for a private investigator and found one who could meet with me later that day. When I explained my concerns to Joe Amos, the private investigator assured me that if Jill was cheating, he would have the evidence I needed. And I left his office feeling a little better. In the back of my mind, I hoped and prayed that I was wasting my money on his services. The next day, I met with a technician at the cottage so he could install some hidden cameras. He also connected a voice recorder to the telephone line. I didn't think it would show anything. Jill wasn't stupid enough to use the house phone if she was cheating. A week later, I contacted Joe, and the news was devastating. All this is in the report, and the DVD is very clear. If I were you, I wouldn't watch it. Knowing is one thing, but seeing is a completely different game. After thanking Joe for his advice, I paid him my final fee and left with the report and DVD. Back in my office, I didn't take Joe's advice and watched the DVD. The report revealed that her so-called girl outings were a cover for her to have sex with some jerk she was working with. They took several long lunches and the afternoon off to go and have sex at a motel a few miles away, and the report also said they went to his house several times. The DVD was recorded on Thursday. Jill arrived home in the afternoon with a man. They immediately went to the bedroom and engaged in debauchery like wild animals for several hours. Jill did everything he wanted. What really shocked and disgusted me was what Jill said to her lover, "I need to meet you and the guys again. What we have is great. Having you all together is heaven. I've never met a guy she's been horny with. We were both about the same age and build. It is impossible to say that he was somehow better than me. Given the evidence, I plan to catch them at the cottage, beat the crap out of it, and throw Jill out onto the street." The following Thursday, I left work and drove past where we lived, and sure enough, Jill's car and another one I didn't know were parked in the driveway. I parked on the street and headed toward my house. When I walked inside, I could hear them upstairs, enjoying rough sex. I stormed into the bedroom and yelled at this idiot to get out of my house. This turned out to be a bad move, as it was another idiot. The guy was well over 6 feet tall and must have weighed 100 pounds more than me. I saw him heading towards me, and then everything went dark. When I came to, I was tied to a chair and gagged. Jill was having sex with 3 guys and screaming with pleasure. Eventually, one of them noticed that I was awake. "Hey, look, the little weakling is awake." They all laughed. I watched as Jill freed herself from the mass of bodies on the bed and walked over to where I was sitting. The woman I married stood there and smiled. She pulled the gag out of my mouth. "Why, Jill? Why do this to us?" "I realize that being married to you is boring. I want to have fun, and all you need are children and a wife at home to look after you." "Well, that won't happen. You thought you could barge in and ruin my fun, didn't you?" Jill stared at me with a sick smile on her face. "As you can see, I have 3 real men here who are satisfying me now, so I don't need you anymore. Now that we're done, my friends are going to take you somewhere I hope you enjoy." I didn't know the woman standing in front of me. Of course, it wasn't my wife. Jill wouldn't do that to me, would she? One of the guys came up and hit me hard in the face. The lights went out. I passed out. It was dark when I moved, and it took me a few seconds to get my bearings. I knew that I was lying on my side with my wrists and ankles tied, and I had a hood over my head. The movement told me I was in a vehicle, and judging by the cold metal floor, I assumed it was a van of some kind. "Looks like he's waking up again." "Okay, that saves us the trouble of lugging it around. We're almost there." I was thrown a little when the car was driving on a bumpy road or dirt track. My head hurt from the blow I had received. I was glad when the car stopped. Little did I know that it would have been better if they had kept going. "Untie his legs. At least he can walk his last few steps." The last few steps. I suddenly realized that I was about to be killed. At least it seemed so to me. I was led across some uneven ground, and I almost fell several times. "Get up. I'm not going to carry you. Now go." The voice instructed me when a hand slapped the back of my head. I silently prayed that whatever they were going to do to me would be quick, and if this was my fate, that it would be over with quickly. I stood there, waiting to hear the click of the pistol being loaded, the hood on my head preventing me from seeing anything. Suddenly, they started kicking and punching me, and I fell to the ground. The blows continued until my beaten body lay motionless. I knew that I was still alive, barely, but still alive. I felt a hand touch my neck, fingers moving gently around me. There is no pulse. He is dead. Should we bury him or leave him here? For what? Leave it here. There's no one around for miles, and if his body is ever found, there won't be much left of it. If the guy checking me knew what he was doing, he would have felt my pulse, but where his fingers touched my neck, he had no chance. I heard my attackers laugh as they left. I lay motionless for what seemed like hours, but in reality, it was probably 10 minutes or so. I didn't move until I heard the sound of a car driving away in the distance. As I lay on the ground, I wondered what made Jill hate me so much. What made her become a slut? I always treated her right. Pain shot through my body as I tried to stand up. It took several attempts as my wrists were tied. Finally, I managed to stand up. My body hurt as if I had been hit by a truck. I knew that the first thing I had to do was try to remove the hood from my beaten and mutilated head. I didn't want to wander around in complete darkness. Walking slowly, I came across a bush or something and pressed my head against it, trying to remove the hood. Eventually, the hood caught, and I was able to free myself from it, my eyes adjusting to the different darkness. To be honest, my left eye was closed, and it wasn't much use anyway. I was just hoping that what happened wasn't permanent. Once my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I had no idea where I was. All I knew was that I was left in the forest, or thicket. Slowly, I moved along the path that seemed easiest to me. I was in no condition to climb up after some fall. I'm not ex-military or anything, just a normal guy who didn't want to die. It took everything I had left to just wander in one direction. Sometime later, still in great pain, I noticed a light in the distance. As I approached the source of light, I realized that it was a cottage or farmhouse, and I found enough energy to reach the gate. Trying to open it was beyond my strength. I screamed, and suddenly everything was plunged into darkness again. When I managed to open my eyes, the left one was still closed. I noticed that I was in a room. I tried to sit up. The pain was too much, and I flopped onto my back. "Please don't move. Apparently you had an accident or something." I looked up and saw a woman standing over me. "Who are you? How did I get here?" "I found you near the house last night. I heard you scream. And when I looked around, You were lying on the ground unconscious. I remembered trying to open the gate. Now lie still and tell me what happened, if you can remember. Oh, I remembered everything perfectly. I just wasn't sure if I should discuss this with this strange woman. My name is Rosemary. You can call me Rosie. I prefer it that way. So how did you end up in this state? It's a long story, and I'm not sure if I should tell you. My ribs hurt every time I tried to speak or breathe heavily. Should I call the police? No, please. No police. I promise you that I won't hurt you and I'll tell you what happened, just not right now. Rosie smiled. I must have blacked out because I don't remember anything after that. The next time I woke up, Rosie was in the room and this time I managed to sit up. Rosie fluffed a couple of pillows so I could sit properly. I saw that my torso was wrapped in bandages and there were several cuts on my arms and legs. Do you have a mirror? Rosie nodded and handed me a small mirror. I almost dropped it when I saw my reflection. My lips were cut and swollen. My left eye was black and swollen shut. My right eye was badly bruised, and I had several more cuts on my face. Now, are you ready to tell me who you are and what happened? I nodded my head. I told Rosie everything I could remember, from catching Jill in bed with 3 men to trying to open her gate. Tony, you really should call the police, you know. No, please don't. I will deal with this in my own way and in my own time. The last thing I need is police intervention. Have it your way and do what you have to do. Now, I don't know where you live or anything, so you better stay here until you're mobile and healthy enough to leave. I thanked Rosie for her kindness. I had no idea who this woman was. I think she was about 45 years old, a good 10 years older than me. Rosie allowed me to use her phone to call Barry and let him know I was okay. Tony, where the hell have you been? Everyone is going crazy trying to find you. Jill was here, terribly worried that you were missing. Barry, do me a favor, please. If Jill asks, you haven't heard from me at all. I promise that I will explain everything at the next meeting. If something comes up at work, I trust you to handle it. I ended the call and Barry seemed satisfied. Rosie asked me what my plans were. I'm going to rest until I can move and return home. After this, I'm going to make some people pay for everything. I don't know how yet, but they will pay. Rosie simply nodded and smiled. Do what you have to do, Tony, but please be careful. It suddenly dawned on me that other than knowing her name, I knew nothing about Rosie. And, come to think of it, I had no idea where I was. When Rosie told me the name of the nearest village, I figured I must have been at least 3 hours away from home. Rosie fed and looked after me, and it was only after a few weeks that I felt well enough to leave. I told Rosie that I would call and ask someone to pick me up. I'll drop you off in the village at the railway station. No matter who you call, he will never find this place. It is too remote. I could hardly fit into Rosie's little car, proof that I was not yet fully recovered. I thanked Rosie for everything. Her answer was simple. Do what you have to do, Tony, but please be careful. I sat and waited for Barry to pick me up. Jesus Christ, Tony, what happened to you? Barry asked when he appeared. On the way back, I told Barry everything. He shook his head in disbelief. I think I know why she did it, Barry. If we divorce, she will get half of everything. Jill is greedy and wants everything. I bet she promised her buddies a ton of cash if they got rid of me. She knows the company is worth millions. I think she would sell it and spend her days having sex with whoever wants her. You can stay with me, buddy. If anyone asks, I will tell you that I have no idea where you are. Thank you, Barry. Do me a favor and please bring my laptop from the office. Oh, and I'll also need some clothes. Barry laughed and said he felt like he was harboring a fugitive. Not yet, but this could happen if I get caught while I'm taking revenge. Well, then you better not get caught. I don't want to know what you're planning. On the way, we stopped at a shopping center. I managed to get a few jeans, t-shirts, socks, underwear, and a pair of sneakers. For now, this is enough. I had a full wardrobe at home. Or at least I hoped that was the case. Luckily, it was dark when we pulled up to Barry's house, and I could just imagine the neighbors talking about me. According to Barry, Jill played the role of a loving wife very well. She called everyone who knew me. That is, everyone except the police. She called Barry regularly, every day, and asked if he had any news from me. Of course, his answer was no. Gradually, I recovered and could already walk without experiencing severe pain. Barry told me that Jill's calls are now down to 1 call a week. I assumed she was too busy enjoying herself to worry about me. Sometimes it's good to have time to think. In my case, it led me to think about how terrible my revenge would be. I wanted to truly take revenge and was analyzing my options. Sitting around all day, I came up with a few ways to deal with Jill and her fuck buddies. The problem was that most of my ideas involved someone else. This is something I wasn't prepared for. My hatred led me to what is known as the dark web. After reading it, it was clear that I could hire a hitman if I wanted. There were several references to mechanics, a dark web term for a hitman. Eventually, I had a plan, but I had no idea how to make it a reality, and out of desperation and hatred, I left a message asking for help with a chemical problem. Naturally, I had a few messages from some crazy people, but there was one who seemed to understand what I was getting at. I replied to his message. After a few more messages, I was convinced that the guy was sincere. He seemed satisfied that I was not from law enforcement. He sent me a program to install, and it encrypted our messages. After logging out and closing the VPN software, I searched online for what I was advised to purchase, as I needed to get specific brand names. This took a little longer than expected. Once I had everything I needed, I realized that in order for this to work, I needed to know when Jill and the lovers would be in the house. Returning to the internet, I bought several listening devices, bugs. Most evenings, Barry and I sat and talked. He never asked what I was planning to do, and I never told him. Business was going well, and the company had attracted several new clients, and I assured Barry that I would likely be back in the office in a week or two. When the bugs arrived, I returned to the house and Jill's car was in the driveway. Maybe she had a good night last night. I didn't know, and I didn't care. I watched Jill leave the house, and 5 minutes later, I went inside. Thank God, it didn't occur to her to change the locks. Apparently, she was sure that I was dead, so there was no reason to worry. I installed a bug in the living room and bedroom. It must be said that despite the fact that she had men in her house, it was clean and tidy. There were clean sheets on the bed, and no sign that anyone else had been there. That evening, I heard Jill talking to a man. I recognized the voice as one of the men from the van. He was there, slept with Jill, and told her that he had made an appointment with the others for Friday night. "Oh God, I love group sex. How many of them will there be here?" Jill asked. "I managed to persuade 9 guys. There will be 10 of them, but one of them will not be able to come this week. 9 is enough for me." I turned off my laptop. I didn't need to hear any more. I hoped he would like it, because if my plan worked, then after Friday, no one would have Jill anymore. Friday night, I was sitting in the bushes in front of our house waiting for the fuckfest to start, when Jill finally arrived home with several other cars following her. I gave them 30 minutes, and, figuring that this would be enough time for them to start, I slowly walked towards the back door. I heard a noise upstairs. Jill screamed with pleasure as everyone else cheered her on cheerfully. I walked upstairs quietly, stopping to make sure everyone was in the bedroom. I poured the first liquid onto the carpet, leaving a trail back into the kitchen, then repeated the same with the second liquid. The person who explained this to me was right about one thing. When they mixed together, there was almost no smell. He warned me that the more I used, the stronger the end result. Back in the kitchen, I was faced with the hard part. If I screw this up, we're all going to hell. The third liquid essentially served as a trigger. Once it mixes with others and reacts, all hell breaks loose. I poured the liquid into the puddle next to the other 2. I thought it would take them a few minutes to come into contact with each other. Slowly and silently, I walked out the door, quietly closing it behind me. I raced down the path to where I had parked my rental car. As I drove away, I saw a powerful, bright flash in the rear-view mirror. I didn't stop. I just drove until I got to Barry's house. Luckily, Barry had a date and wasn't home when I got there. I took a shower and went to bed. The next morning, I drove up to the house. I acted as if I wanted to let Jill know that I was alive, despite her friend's best efforts. The other part of the show was to collect my clothes and some personal belongings, even though I knew they were all burned. As I turned into an alley, a policeman stopped me. "Sorry, sir, you can't go any further. But I live here, just down the road, at Laurel Cottage. Park the car and wait here, please." The officer approached the cottage. A few moments later, he returned with a guy in a suit. "Mr. Rowan, I am Detective Inspector Hobson. Do you mind if I ask where you were last night?" "I was at home." "Well, I'm actually staying with a friend. My wife and I are living separately." "How long have you been living with this friend?" "A couple of months. Now I just came to pick up the last of my clothes and personal belongings. Unfortunately, there was a fire in the cottage last night. Can I see? I mean, after all, this is, or was, my home." We walked along the path together. The detective asked me more questions. "Have I stored flammable materials at home?" "No way. There was a small gas can in the shed that I used to fuel my lawnmower. The cottage turned into a complete ruin. The wall collapsed at one end. The roof sank at a very awkward angle. As you can see, sir, the fire destroyed the building. No one except firefighters and rescue workers are allowed inside. They are currently recovering bodies. Did your wife have friends last night?" "I have no idea. Like I said, we broke up. I don't know what she did last night. You said they are recovering bodies. How many are there?" 10 so far. They think there are no more bodies. They are just making a final check." I stood there looking as shocked as anyone else in my position. I thanked the detective and walked back to my car. When I was a few miles away, I called Barry, explained the situation to him, and Barry assured me that he would confirm that we were home all night. Naturally, they asked me about the fire. I told the police that Jill and I had broken up. I told them I was staying with Barry until we sorted things out. The investigation into the fire was completed 2 months later, and it was ruled an accident, likely caused by a faulty gas appliance. The coroner has recorded verdicts of accidental death for those who died in the fire, 1 woman and 9 men. I stated in my statement that Jill was probably having a party with one of her work colleagues since we were separated. I didn't have a better answer. I attended Jill's funeral more for the sake of appearances than anything else. And when the coffin was lowered into the ground, I threw in a handful of earth and 1 rose. There was a card pinned to the stem of the rose, and I wrote on it, "Rot in hell, you creature." Most of those present probably thought it was a personal gesture of love. Yes, exactly, as if it could be. Jill's mother actually asked me why I wasn't home that night and what was Jill doing in a house with 9 men. We were separated pending divorce. As for why she had 9 men in her house, you figure it out for yourself. I turned and walked away. I moved out of Barry's house into a small furnished apartment. The only major downside was having to replace my entire wardrobe. In the end, the insurance company paid for the house, and I sold the property to a developer because I didn't want to rebuild it. The media speculated about why 9 men and 1 woman were in the house that night. I didn't comment and let people come to their own conclusions. As for the 9 men, I did not know any of them and did not pay attention to newspaper reports about their funerals. I tried to go back to thank Rosie for saving me. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the cottage despite asking some locals where it was. Barry never asked me about the fire. He actually offered to set me up on a date if I was interested. Right now, I just want to move on with my life, especially since there is a woman who lives in the same apartment building as me. We have never spoken yet, except to say hello to each other. If we do start dating and it really gets serious, a prenuptial agreement will be in place before I get married again. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to